Dakota Territory. Spring of 1887, the morning sun was barely up when the laughter started. Naomi Alder stood at the edge of the wooden church steps, her wedding veil tugged sideways by the wind, her cheeks burning as loud hoots echoed across the yard. The groom was gone. He had run off 2 nights before, but folks waited anyway just to see if she would show up in her ivory dress. She had, and they had come to laugh. Too much woman for one man, someone snorted near the hitching post. She should marry the pantry, another voice cracked. Naomi's hands gripped the lace at her waist, the fabric pressing against her round stomach. Her fingers trembled, but she kept her chin level. Her father had already gone back inside the wagon, too ashamed to face the town, and her mother, God rest her, had passed the year before. She stood there alone, a 24-year-old woman, mocked for the curve of her arms, the softness of her hips, the weight of her body that had always made her the target of stares and whispers. She had been raised to believe her worth came from being chosen, and now, even that had been taken. The crowd began to clear, the novelty fading. Naomi turned, swallowing back the thickness in her throat. Her boots tapped down the wooden steps. She tried to keep her steps even, her back straight, but inside she was splintering. She did not see the man on the edge of the crowd until his voice cut through the air. "You all done?" he asked, voice low but sharp enough to slice through the wind. She froze. The man stepped forward, dust clinging to the hem of his coat. He was tall, tanned from sun, with a black hat pulled low over brown eyes that held something steady, not pity, but calm. No one answered him. "Then maybe let the lady pass," he said. People shifted. Naomi looked up at him, unsure if she should thank him or keep walking. He tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am," she blinked. "You do not have to, just figured someone ought to say something decent." She nodded, lips tight. "Thank you. Name's Xander Decker. I live out past the ridge near the old ash grove." She did not know why he told her that. Maybe he saw how hollow her day had turned. Maybe he just wanted her to know not every man ran. She said nothing, just walked past him down the lane, away from the church and the dress and the shame. Naomi moved in with her cousin for a time, helped with sewing, kept to herself. The town stopped whispering after a week, but the look stayed. She avoided crowds, spoke little, and spent most of her days walking the edge of the fields behind the mercantile. One afternoon, near the end of May, she was setting a basket of mending down on a bench when hooves clopped up the road. Xander Decker. He tied his horse, then walked straight to her like he had planned it. "You mend for folks?" he asked. She looked up. "Yes." He held out a worn coat. "Stitch split here." He pointed to the shoulder. "And I got 2 shirts with tears." "I can bring them tomorrow." She took the coat. "I can have this done by Friday." He nodded. "That works." He turned to leave, then paused. "You do not talk much." "I have learned it is safer." Xander looked at her. "You are not the problem. What they did was cruel." Naomi's throat tightened. "Cruel or not, it was true, was it not?" He stepped closer. "You think that is truth? Because of a man too small to deserve you?" She did not answer. He nodded once, then walked off. She stitched the coat that night. When she ran her fingers along the split seam, she thought of his voice. The way he had looked at her, not with surprise or discomfort, but steady, like he saw her without flinching. By June, he came every week, always with something to mend, though she suspected it was not about the stitching. He would sit on the bench beside her while she worked, talking about his horses, the creek that ran behind his land, the way the sky turned violet before storms. Some days, he brought her apples. Once, he handed her a small square of chocolate from a traveling merchant. "You do not have to bring me things," she said. "I know." She smiled just a little. "Why are you kind to me?" He leaned back against the bench. "Because you are the shape of my heaven." Naomi froze. "What?" "My ma used to say heaven was not clouds and wings." She said it was the place where you feel peace in your bones, where your heart stops bracing for the next blow. He turned to her. You remind me of that. She looked away, her eyes hot. You do not know me. I am learning. She started to laugh, soft and surprised. You are strange, Xander Decker. Maybe, but I know what I see. By July, she started walking out past the ash grove. He taught her how to saddle a horse, how to check for fever in cattle, how to listen for foxes in the brush. She cooked for him sometimes. He helped her fix the old fence behind her cousin's home. He never asked about the wedding day. She never asked why he stayed. But every time he looked at her, it felt like being seen for the first time. One morning, Naomi was waiting on the porch with a basket of bread when she saw two children walking the road barefoot. A girl, maybe 6, and a boy smaller, both sunburned and dragging a torn satchel. She stepped down. Where are your parents? The girl looked up. Gone. Mama said she was coming back. She did not. Naomi's chest ached. What are your names, Penny? The girl said. That is my brother Paul. She brought them inside, fed them, washed their hands. That evening she rode out to Xander's with the children in tow. They were alone. I could not, she started. Xander looked at the small faces peeking from behind her skirt. You did the right thing. I want to keep them, he nodded. Then we will, Naomi blinked. He stepped close. You think I am just going to let you do this alone? She stared at him, heart pounding. I am not going anywhere, Naomi, he said. She let out a shaky breath. Neither am I. He reached for her hand. Good. She looked down at their fingers, at the children sitting on the porch swing, at the land stretching out behind him. It did not feel like the end of something anymore. It felt like the start of everything. The wind came low and warm through the cottonwoods as Naomi hung linens on the line behind Xander's cabin. Penny knelt nearby, trying to coax a sleepy hen from beneath the porch with a bit of cornbread. Paul sat on an overturned bucket, watching intently, his small hands still sticky from breakfast. Xander was down by the creek, mending a fence post that had come loose in the night storm. Naomi could hear the steady rhythm of his hammer, the occasional call of a crow overhead. She had been in this house nearly 3 weeks, long enough to know which floorboards creaked, which cupboards stuck, which mornings Xander rose before dawn, and which ones he took slow. Penny, Naomi called. If she doesn't want to come out, let her be. The girl glanced her way. She's hiding eggs again. Naomi smiled, but didn't answer. The hen had her reasons, same as anyone. When she stepped inside to fetch the last basin, she found Xander's ledger open on the table. He'd drawn up columns in a careful, blocky hand: supplies needed through harvest, how much feed to set aside, notes scribbled about roof repairs. Off to one side there were 4 names: his, Naomi's, Penny's, and Paul's. A line connected them. Below, in smaller writing, he had listed winter coats, extra flour, boots for the boy. She touched her name with her fingertips, then closed the book gently. That evening, after the children had been tucked into the loft with quilts and soft whispers, Naomi stood with Xander on the porch. The lantern behind them threw their shadows long across the steps. Crickets sang in the grass. He handed her a cup of coffee, warm and dark. You keep your books cleaner than any man I've known, she said, sipping. My father never did, he replied. Used to forget what he owed and to who. Had to learn early. Writing things down kept us from losing what little we had. Naomi nodded, watching the stars push up through the dusk. You wrote our names. He looked over. Seemed right to. She let the silence stretch. It was easier with him. The quiet didn't press, it settled. There's things I never thought I'd be part of, she said softly. A home like this, a man like you. Xander shifted. You thought you'd never be wanted. She didn't answer. He reached for her hand, calloused fingers brushing hers. I saw you on that church step. Not because of the dress or what they said. I saw the way you stood there like you were holding yourself together with nothing but pride." Naomi's throat tightened, but she didn't pull away. "You think I don't know what it means to be left behind," he said. "My mother died when I was 19. My brother ran off to Kansas the next winter, never wrote, never came back. I worked this land alone for years, had a dog for a while, then just the land. Why didn't you marry? Because there wasn't anyone who made the quiet feel like company, until you." She turned to him fully. The breeze lifted a few strands of her hair. "I'm not easy," she said. "Not just the shape of me, I carry things. Hurt, doubt, I don't always know how to let go." Xander didn't look away. "I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for real." Then, slow as dawn, he leaned forward and kissed her gentle, steady, both of them still holding the space between like something sacred. When she opened her eyes, her breath caught in her chest. "I've never felt safe like this," she whispered. He took her hand again. "Then stay," she nodded. "I already have." Inside, the floor creaked a small footstep above. Paul's voice, sleep-heavy, called out. Naomi smiled. "I'll see to him." Xander didn't stop her, but before she stepped inside, he said, "There's a field behind the barn. I've been clearing it." She looked back, thought it might be a good place to build something bigger for all of us. Naomi didn't answer right away. She just held his gaze, the porch lantern flickering between them. Then she said, "Let's plant it first, something that roots." He nodded. "Then that's what we'll do." She disappeared into the doorway, her footsteps soft against the floorboards, and Xander stayed on the porch a while longer, listening to the wind. The field behind the barn took to seed better than Naomi expected. Xander worked the furrows with a quiet patience, turning the soil with his sleeves rolled high and his brow dark with sweat. Naomi followed behind him with a basket of sprouted onions and early beans, pressing each into the earth with firm, steady hands. Penny and Paul played beneath the cottonwoods, their laughter drifting faintly toward the rows. By late July, the sprouts had taken root. Naomi watched them from the porch one evening as the wind slid across the grass in long, low waves. She had never grown anything of her own before. Not really. The closest she'd come was tending her mother's window herbs back in Yankton. Those had died the winter her mother did. She glanced over her shoulder through the open doorway. Xander was at the table with Penny, showing her how to shape a looped knot in twine. Paul stood nearby, balancing on the heel of one foot with the other tucked behind his knee like a stork. Naomi stepped inside. "You ever think about hiring help for harvest?" she asked. Xander glanced up. "I did. Then I met you." She gave him a look. He sat back, the twine slipping from his fingers. "I mean it. You've got a way with things, organization. You remember what I forget." Naomi leaned against the doorframe. "I've never run a farm." "You're not running it alone." Penny held up her crooked knot. "Is it right?" Xander tilted his head, close enough to hold a fence gate. Naomi walked over and kissed the girl's crown, then turned to Paul. "Your turn." He shook his head. "I want to help with the cows." "You'll get your chance come fall," said Xander. "They'll need tagging and weighing." Paul's eyes lit up. Naomi moved to the basin to check the soaked lentils for supper. "You ever think about schooling?" Xander stood stretched. "There's a teacher in town, Mrs. Bertram. She holds class in the old post office twice a week. Could ask if she's room for 2 more. They've never been inside a schoolhouse," Naomi said. "They'll learn, all of us are." She stirred the pot, her thoughts turning. "I've been thinking of writing to the judge." Xander stepped beside her. "About the children," Naomi nodded. "If I put in a request to be named guardian, it'll hold better than just keeping them here. The judge is fair. He's seen what happened. I believe he'll sign it." Xander picked up a clean towel and dried his hands. "You want to sign as Naomi Alder?" She looked up at him. The stove's heat flushed her cheeks. "I want to sign as Naomi Decker," she said. He didn't speak right away. Just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. She hadn't seen it before. He set it on the table, unwrapped it. Inside lay a silver ring, modest but well made, engraved with a single etched line that circled the band like a river path. "I bought it from Mr. Glasser the day after I saw you with the children," he said. "Kept it until I was sure you wanted to stay." Naomi's breath caught. "You don't need a church or a paper to be mine," he said. "But if you want to wear it, I'd be proud." She stepped forward. "I want to wear it." He took her hand. Their fingers met like two halves of something long severed. As he slid the ring onto her finger, Penny clapped her hands. Paul grinned and ran to Xander's leg, wrapping his arms around it. Naomi looked down at her hand, then up at the man who had never once asked her to change. The sun dipped low behind the distant hills, casting a copper glow across the fields. Naomi stepped outside and looked toward the rows they'd planted. The land was still but not silent. Birds called from the trees. A breeze rustled the stalks. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped once, quick and sharp, before falling quiet again. She turned back to the porch where Xander stood with the children beside him. "I think it's time we built that house," she said. He nodded. "You draw the shape. I'll cut the timber." And that was how they began. Not with ceremony, but with hands in the dirt, names stitched into a ledger, and a ring that fit like it had always been waiting. The frame of the new house came up slow, beam by beam, each piece cut by Xander's saw and lifted into place by calloused hands and a borrowed pulley from the blacksmith. Naomi kept the ledger close, sketching out measurements, counting nails, marking costs in careful pencil strokes. They built it beside the ash grove, where the ground rose slightly and the breeze carried the scent of wild mint in the early mornings. Penny and Paul collected pebbles and scraps of wood, pretending to build their own cabin beside the roots of a cottonwood. Naomi let them, marking their efforts with a smile as she stitched curtains from old flour sacks, hemming each edge with quiet care. One afternoon, as clouds banked low and heavy in the west, Naomi carried a basket of folded linens to the small cabin they still slept in while the new one rose. She paused at the threshold, listening. It was quiet, too quiet. She stepped inside. The children weren't there. She turned, heart thudding, and saw Xander jogging up from the pasture. His hands were empty, his coat dusted from the dry soil. "They're not with you?" she asked. "No," he said, already scanning the horizon. "Last I saw, they were near the creek." Naomi didn't hesitate. "I'll check the grove." They found them near the bend in the stream, huddled beneath a low willow. Paul clutched a broken bird's wing in his hands, tears streaking his cheeks. Penny looked up at Naomi, her face pale. "He fell," she whispered. "We tried to help." Naomi crouched beside them, pressing gentle fingers to Paul's back. "You did right bringing him here." Xander knelt and studied the bird. "He's hurt but not gone." "I didn't want him to die," Paul said, voice trembling. Naomi gathered him into her arms. "Not everything that breaks stays broken." That night, they made a small nest from a wooden crate and old cloth. Penny took charge of feeding the bird drops of water with a hollowed quill. Paul wouldn't leave its side until sleep finally pulled him under. Later, as rain tapped softly against the roof, Naomi sat beside Xander with her sewing in her lap. He was carving a length of cedar into a smooth rail for the new porch. "You ever think about your own mother?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Sometimes. She sang when she worked. I remember that most. Couldn't sing on key to save her life, but she didn't mind." Naomi set her needle down. "Mine used to hum a hymn when she was angry, never raised her voice, just hummed until she calmed." "Funny what stays with you," he said. She reached over and touched his wrist. "I want us to be those memories." He turned to her. "For them," she said. For each other. Xander nodded, setting the carving aside. Then we'll build more than walls. They sat quiet after that, the lamp flickering low between them, the children breathing soft in the loft above. By the end of August, the walls of the house stood tall, with a roof that held steady against the wind. Naomi planted sunflowers along the southern edge, their heads already turning toward the light. The bird, now named Flint by Paul, learned to perch on the windowsill, one wing still dragging slightly, but stronger by the day. One morning, Naomi stood at the edge of the porch, watching the first light spill across the fields. Xander joined her, sliding an arm around her waist. "What do you see?" he asked. She leaned into him. "A home that doesn't doubt me." He kissed her temples, slow and sure. Behind them, Penny called for breakfast. Paul clattered down the ladder. Naomi turned toward the doorway, toward the sound of children's feet and morning bread and the scent of something growing that didn't need permission. They had built it all from what was left and what had been given. And it was enough. More than enough. The first frost came early. It laid a thin crust of ice over the troughs before sunrise, turned the leaves brittle and pale at the edges. Naomi stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, stirring cornmeal into a thick batter. Behind her, Xander was oiling the hinges on the new front door, the rhythmic creak of the hinge echoing softly in the half-finished room. Paul sat at the table tracing letters into a slate, his brows drawn tight in focus. Penny was curled up near the hearth, whispering to Flint, who had taken to perching on the rung of a stool like it was his rightful throne. Xander set the oil can down and wiped his hands with a cloth. "That door won't squeal again this side of December." Naomi turned from the stove. "We'll be grateful when the wind comes through." He crossed the room to her and rested a hand on her lower back, his palm warm through the fabric of her dress. "You've been quiet since sunrise." She didn't answer at first, just moved the skillet off the fire and covered it with a cloth. Then she tipped her chin toward the table. "Penny asked me last night if I thought their mother might still be alive." Xander's hand stilled. "I told her I didn't know," Naomi said, "but I think she does. I think she knows in the way children do deep down." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "You didn't lie to her." "I didn't have to," Naomi said, "but it made me think about how much they've lost and what we're trying to give them." She looked up. "Do you think it's enough?" Xander looked past her to the children, to the soft clatter of Paul's chalk and the way Penny's hair had fallen over one eye. "I think they're not measuring in grand things yet, just warmth, kindness. Something that doesn't leave when the sun goes down." Naomi turned back to the stove and pressed her lips together, then finally nodded. Later that day, Xander rode out toward Sturgis to collect a shipment of nails and lamp oil. Naomi stayed behind, sorting dried beans and checking the seams on the children's winter coats. Around midday, a rider came up the path, an older woman with a straight spine and a face weathered by wind and years. Naomi stepped off the porch. "Can I help you?" The woman dismounted and offered a polite nod. "Name's Clara Moore. I'm with the circuit court. Judge sent me out to confirm the guardianship petition." Naomi wiped her hands on her apron. "Of course." "Come inside." Clara sat on the bench by the hearth while Naomi poured tea from a kettle still warm. She answered each question clearly: how the children came to her, how long she'd cared for them, what provisions had been made. Penny and Paul sat quiet on the floor through it all, sensing the weight in the woman's tone. When the questions stopped, Clara took a long sip of tea. "I saw your name before," she said. "Back in Yankton. I clerked there once." Naomi's fingers tightened around her cup. "Then you know what happened." "I know a man without backbone left a good woman to take the blame." Clara set her cup down. "But I also know resilience when I see it." Naomi met her gaze. "Is that what this is?" Clara stood. "It's more than enough. I'll send word to the judge. You'll have your name on those papers before the snow sticks." When Xander returned that evening, Naomi met him at the gate. She didn't speak right away, just placed her hand on his chest, fingers splayed over his heart. He looked at her closely. "What happened?" "They are ours," she said. "By law." He smiled, slow and full, the kind of smile that started in the chest. "Then let's build the rest of it." By winter's edge, the big house was done. The loft held 2 beds, each with stitched quilts Naomi had worked by lantern light. The main room had shelves carved from leftover cedar and a table wide enough for 4. Naomi planted dried lavender in a clay pot by the window. Penny hung her drawings in the hallway. Paul claimed a hook near the door for his coat and placed Flint's perch beside the stove. On the first day snow fell, Naomi and Xander stood on the porch, arms wrapped around each other, watching the flakes settle on the fields. The children raced through the yard, their laughter muffled by scarves. Naomi tucked her head beneath Xander's chin. "I think I've stopped waiting for something to go wrong." He kissed the top of her head. "That's how you know it's real." She looked up at him. "Promise me something, anything, that you'll grow old with me here. That we'll never leave this place unless we both agree." He looked out across the land. "I built it for you. Every beam, every nail. I'd rather it fall around us than stand without you in it." She touched his face, traced the line of his jaw with her thumb. "Then I won't fear what's ahead." The years that followed were steady. The fields yielded enough to trade for sugar and books. Penny learned to read by oil lamp, her voice growing strong and clear. Paul took to carving, his hands always whittling spoons, buttons, small animals Naomi kept on the shelf. Flint grew old and quiet, still perching near the stove, now and then letting out a sleepy chirp. The ash grove thickened, and Naomi planted a row of peonies near the porch. They never spoke again of the church steps or the man who'd left her there. Not because they forgot, but because life had made it irrelevant. On their 10th winter, Xander built Naomi a rocking chair from cherry wood. He carved her name into the underside, where only she would see it. She sat in it each evening, wrapped in a shawl, her children grown taller than her now, her husband still bringing in firewood with snow in his beard and a grin that never faded. And every night before the lamps were blown out, he would kneel beside her, press a kiss to her hand and say, "Still the shape of my heaven." And she would answer, "Still the place I choose to stay." And they did, always.